Hey, get everybody out!
Drop it! Drop it!
What are you guys searching me for?
I'm patting you down. Stop.
Why are you patting me down?
You're being detained. Stop.
Why
Stop.
On April 3rd, 2025, what began as a property crime quickly developed into a multi-agency crisis that crossed state lines, shifted environments from road to water, and ended in lethal violence. The event sequence illustrates how a single opportunistic theft can escalate when offenders exploit speed, geography, and uncertainty. While law enforcement must make rapid decisions under incomplete information, evolving risk, and public safety pressure. The trigger event, a theft that creates immediate mobility. The initiating incident was the theft of a United States Postal Service delivery van. According to official reporting, the van was taken in a sudden and targeted move. A suspect exited another vehicle and entered the postal van while a postal worker was actively delivering packages. In these scenarios, offenders gain more than a vehicle. They gain access to mail, parcels, and a moving cache of potentially valuable items. The significance is not only financial. A stolen government vehicle can cause a swift law enforcement response, and the presence of mail tracking devices introduces a critical variable: location transparency. In this case, a scanner inside the stolen van was trackable. That single fact reshaped the early investigative posture. Rather than depending on witnesses or chance sightings alone, deputies could receive real-time location updates. A postal supervisor or manager relayed ongoing tracking information, giving investigators the ability to anticipate likely movement routes, identify potential stopping points, and coordinate across jurisdictions before the suspects fully understood the extent of the tracking exposure. Early coordination, Nevada becomes the next pressure point. The tracker's movement indicated the van traveled toward the area around casinos in Laughlin, Nevada. When the signal appeared to stop in or near the parking area of a major casino property, local law enforcement requested support from Las Vegas area police resources. At that point, investigators faced a common problem. Location data can guide responders to an area, but it does not guarantee the stolen vehicle is still present, nor does it identify what has already been transferred out of it. When officers and security personnel assessed the casino area scene, the stolen postal van itself was not immediately visible. However, a different vehicle, a pickup truck, became central to the next stage. The truck bed contained a large quantity of packages, consistent with mail theft activity. Casino surveillance review reportedly indicated 2 suspects were involved. Clothing descriptions, one in a gray tank top and the other in a white t-shirt, provided immediate identifiers for patrol units. This kind of detail matters because it turns a broad search into a targeted one. A suspect description can be circulated, compared against camera footage, and used to justify investigative stops when someone matches key features. From a procedural standpoint, the scene also demonstrated why private security and surveillance systems can become essential force multipliers. Casino camera networks often capture continuous movement and provide timed visual confirmation of suspect behavior. Here, the footage reportedly showed 2 men arriving, exiting their vehicle and observing police activity, suggesting an awareness of risk and an ability to adjust behavior in response to law enforcement presence. The first tactical error, losing the waterline security footage, later showed the 2 suspects leaving via a water taxi. Water-based escape routes are less common in many law enforcement pursuits, and they can complicate response because they require different equipment, different positioning, and often different agencies. A suspect who shifts from land to water can create a temporary advantage by forcing police to react outside normal patterns of road pursuit. Approximately 50 minutes after the suspects were first seen leaving by water taxi, one suspect, identified visually as the one wearing the gray tank top, returned alone. Surveillance indicated he watched police and security activity near the truck, then headed back toward the dock area. That behavior suggests a blend of risk-taking and calculation. Returning to a hot scene can indicate the suspect is trying to retrieve something left behind, confirm whether evidence has been discovered, or assess the scope of law enforcement response. At that moment, officers moved to intercept the returning suspect near the water taxi area. What followed became one of the incident's defining escalations. The suspect, now believed to be armed, initiated a rapid flight that leveraged confusion and terrain. Escalation into armed flight, from dock to river. When officers attempted engagement, the suspect reportedly ran, and the situation became unstable as witnesses and officers tried to maintain visual tracking. The critical development was the understanding that the suspect had a firearm. Once a suspect is believed to be armed, the risk profile changes immediately. Commands, spacing, cover selection, and the urgency of containment all shift, because the suspect is no longer only a flight risk, but a potential lethal threat to officers and bystanders. In the initial confusion, officers moved away from the dock area in the direction witnesses last observed the suspect. That decision, understandable in real time, proved costly. The suspect used the gap to execute an unexpected move. He boarded an empty water taxi and began driving it himself, traveling down the Colorado River toward Bullhead City, Arizona. This transition illustrates a major vulnerability in multi-terrain events. A suspect does not need a sophisticated plan to gain advantage. They only need to exploit a moment when law enforcement assumes the suspect is moving on foot or hiding locally. By using a vessel already present in the environment, the suspect created distance quickly and forced law enforcement to pursue with limited preparation. Las Vegas area officers pursued using another commandeered water taxi while simultaneously notifying Bullhead City Police that an armed suspect was moving into their jurisdiction by water. Jurisdictional shift. Arizona receives a moving threat. As the suspect approached Bullhead City, the incident became a coordinated interagency operation. This stage is defined by rapid communication and the need to establish perimeter control before a suspect disappears into an urban environment. A suspect who reaches land with a firearm can blend into neighborhoods, conceal themselves in structures, or take hostages. Every minute before perimeter closure increases the chance that the suspect becomes untraceable. Officers reported losing sight of the suspect after he abandoned the water taxi and fled on foot. Law enforcement repositioned to a nearby apartment complex area where the suspect was last seen. The environment changed sharply, from river pursuit to residential setting with civilians present, limited cover visibility, and unpredictable lines of sight. At this point, the incident became a high-risk search for an armed individual. Officers adopted cover positions and awaited additional units to establish a perimeter. The primary tactical goal was to prevent escape while reducing the likelihood of crossfire or civilian injury. The deadly confrontation, a sudden ambush dynamic. A Bullhead City police officer, identified as 24-year-old Matt Sloan, arrived in the apartment complex area soon after the suspect's last known location. The confrontation reportedly began with the suspect emerging from concealment and presenting a firearm toward the police vehicle. This created an ambush-like dynamic. An armed suspect initiating a close-range encounter, forcing officers into immediate defensive response. When another officer arrived, both officers engaged the suspect. The exchange resulted in shots fired and the suspect being downed. In incidents like this, the sequence is often measured in seconds, not minutes. Officers must assess threat, locate cover, and act before the suspect can fire again or move toward civilians. One additional civilian safety complication emerged during the exchange. A resident in the area reportedly became exposed near community mailboxes as gunfire occurred. Officers redirected the resident to cover and assessed for injury. These moments are critical because they demonstrate the dual mission during armed confrontations. Neutralize the threat while simultaneously extracting civilians from danger. While the suspect was down, officers maintained a cautious approach. Standard post-shooting procedure includes ensuring the suspect is no longer capable of firing, confirming whether additional suspects are present, and requesting medical response. Officers also begin separating involved personnel and preserving the scene for subsequent investigation, because a shooting immediately becomes both an operational event and a legal evidentiary event. Identification and background. Turning a scene into a case file. After the suspect was secured, officers identified him as 48-year-old Eric Watkins. Police records associated with the suspect reportedly indicated prior involvement in auto burglaries and active warrants, including an extradition-related warrant connected to a sex offense issued in late 2024. Additional court documents referenced previous charges such as production or transfer of false identification documents, possession of another person's identity documents, criminal trespass, unlawful flight from law enforcement, and weapon possession restrictions. Some charges, according to reporting, had been dismissed, but the existence of a documented pattern still shaped investigators' understanding of risk and behavior. These details do not, by themselves, explain the motive for this specific spree. However, they provide context for why a suspect might choose extreme flight rather than surrender. A person facing multiple legal exposures may perceive capture as catastrophic, increasing the likelihood of desperate decisions, including armed resistance. The case was not over. The second suspect problem. Even after one suspect was down, the incident remained unresolved. Surveillance from the casino had indicated 2 suspects. That meant another individual could still be armed, still mobile, and still capable of violence. The presence of a second suspect transforms the risk environment. Officers cannot relax perimeter control, and they must treat bystanders and unknown individuals with heightened caution. As officers scanned the area, they observed someone across the street who seemed to resemble the general description of the second suspect. In high-stress situations following gunfire, the possibility of misidentification increases. Officers must balance speed with accuracy. A person wearing similar clothing may be a suspect or an unrelated civilian. The stakes of a wrong decision are high. Unnecessary force harms innocence and can compromise public trust, while hesitation can allow a real suspect to escape. Officers detained and searched the individual, applying a temporary investigative hold while clarifying identity. The detained person insisted he was not involved and had only approached because an employer instructed him to observe the disturbance after hearing gunshots. Another officer consulted the employer, who confirmed the person had been working and was not part of the incident. Once that verification occurred, officers released him. This moment illustrates a central reality of crisis policing. Investigators must operate with imperfect information, and temporary detentions can occur when a description is broad and danger is immediate. The legitimacy of such detentions depends on proportionality, speed of verification, and respectful release once innocence is confirmed. Backtracking the origin. The postal van in the desert. While Arizona officers handled the confrontation and search, deputies in Mojave County returned to the origin point of the spree to locate the stolen postal van. According to police reports, the van was found abandoned approximately 50 yards into the desert. The location suggests deliberate concealment, at least temporarily, possibly to buy time, remove tracking items, or shift stolen packages to another vehicle. After confirming the vehicle was empty, deputies coordinated with the postal employee to recover it. The postal worker's account supported the sudden nature of the theft. The suspect entered and drove off quickly. Importantly, she stated she did not see the second individual clearly, reinforcing the investigative challenge. While the first suspect's actions were visible, the second suspect remained difficult to identify reliably. Investigative implications. Why this case escalated so fast. This event sequence demonstrates how quickly multi-jurisdictional incidents develop when 3 factors converge: mobility, a stolen vehicle, then a stolen water taxi, allowed rapid movement and created time pressure. Armed threat. The introduction of a firearm changed every tactical calculation and increased the risk to civilians. Information gaps. Even with a tracker, law enforcement faced uncertainty about suspect count, roles, and direction, creating vulnerabilities that the suspect exploited. From an investigative standpoint, the aftermath would include evidence collection at multiple sites: the abandoned postal van location, the casino parking area, the dock and water taxi route, and the apartment complex shooting scene. Each site carries different evidence categories: surveillance footage, physical traces, chain of custody documentation, and digital tracking records. Coordinating these elements across agencies is essential because successful prosecution depends on demonstrating continuity: how the theft led to the truck, how the suspects moved, how the water taxi was taken, and how the final confrontation occurred. At the same time, the case remains structurally incomplete without the second suspect's resolution. Where one suspect is identified and downed, the unanswered question is whether the second suspect escaped, whether he participated directly in the later violence, and how he separated from the primary suspect during the spree. That question would determine subsequent search efforts, warrants, public safety alerts, and prosecutorial strategy. Conclusion of this part: a chaotic spree ends, but the case continues. By the end of this phase, law enforcement had contained the immediate lethal threat posed by one armed suspect, recovered the stolen postal van, and verified the mistaken detention of an uninvolved civilian. Yet the broader incident remained active because the existence of a second suspect kept the threat picture open. The story of April 3, 2025 is not simply a sequence of dramatic events. It is a case study in escalation. How opportunistic theft can transform into a violent, multi-terrain pursuit, and how the combination of tracking technology, surveillance systems, and interagency coordination can limit, but not eliminate, the chaos created by a determined suspect. Aftermath, manhunt, evidence trail, and the unanswered second suspect. The fatal confrontation at the Bullhead City apartment complex did not bring resolution. It marked a transition. When an incident escalates into a police shooting, the immediate threat may be contained, but the investigation expands in complexity, scope, and consequence. In this case, the death of one suspect confirmed the level of danger involved, yet it also left a critical question unanswered. Where was the second suspect, and how far had he already moved beyond the reach of the perimeter? Examines the second phase of the case: the manhunt, the forensic reconstruction, and the investigative pressure that follows when a crime spree spans multiple locations, multiple agencies, and multiple legal responsibilities at once. The case splits into two emergencies: public safety pursuit versus formal homicide-grade investigation. Once shots are fired and a suspect is down, law enforcement operations divide into parallel tracks. The first track is urgent and tactical, verifying whether the danger is fully neutralized. This includes confirming there are no additional armed suspects nearby, ensuring the weapon has been secured, checking for injured civilians, and sealing the immediate area to prevent further harm. The second track begins immediately after, turning the scene into a legally defensible investigation. Any officer involved shooting triggers strict procedural expectations: scene preservation, evidence integrity, and the separation of involved officers from investigative staff. Every action taken after the moment of gunfire becomes part of the eventual narrative, examined by supervisors, attorneys, and potentially the courts. In this case, the presence of a second suspect created a rare overlap, where both tracks remained equally urgent. The scene could not fully cool down because one suspect was still believed to be at large and potentially armed. At the same time, the shooting scene now had to be treated as a major evidentiary location with chain of custody requirements. This is where investigative strain begins, when the environment demands speed, but the legal system demands precision. The second suspect problem: how one unresolved person keeps the threat alive. From the beginning, surveillance and evidence at the Nevada casino indicated two individuals were involved. That detail is not a minor footnote. It is the structural reason the incident did not end when Eric Watkins was identified and downed. A second suspect introduces major uncertainties. Was the second suspect armed as well? Did he separate early, or was he still nearby? Was he moving on foot, in a vehicle, or hiding in the local area? Did he have access to stolen property, weapons, or additional transportation? Was he trying to leave the state again? A manhunt is not only a search for a person, it is a race against information gaps. When officers do not know the second suspect's location, the investigation becomes reactive. It must respond to the possibility of escape, concealment, or additional violence without the benefit of a confirmed visual track. This is why second suspects are dangerous to investigations. They create an ongoing emergency even after the largest visible event has ended. Perimeter reality: why containment often fails. Speed beats structure when geography is fractured. The moment Eric fled by water taxi, he forced law enforcement into a multi-terrain pursuit. That shift created a geographic fracture. Agencies were coordinating across land routes, waterfront boundaries, and residential corridors. The bigger the footprint, the harder it becomes to guarantee that every exit route is controlled. To contain a second suspect, law enforcement needs 3 advantages: timing, getting perimeter units in place before the suspect exits the zone, accurate suspect description, narrow enough to reduce false stops coordination, shared radio communication, and consistent role assignments. In this case, the suspect description for the second person, white baggy t-shirt, light baggy pants, dark shoes, medium build, light brown short hair, was descriptive but not unique. Many civilians could resemble that general description, especially at a distance or in fast-moving conditions. That makes containment harder because the perimeter must treat multiple people as possible threats until they can be cleared. This creates an unavoidable consequence. Mistaken detentions increase. It does not mean the system intends harm. It means the situation forces caution under time pressure. The brief detention of an innocent person near the apartment complex reflects exactly how this plays out. The decision to detain was driven by visual similarity and the need to clear immediate threats. The release was driven by verification, contacting an employer and confirming the person's presence and role before the shooting. This event illustrates an uncomfortable truth in crisis policing. Error risk rises when speed is demanded, but safety still has to be maintained. Why the investigation immediately turns to video surveillance becomes the backbone of truth in multi-location crimes. When incidents span multiple sites, postal theft scene, casino lot, water taxi dock, river pursuit path, apartment complex, the only way to build a single coherent timeline is to treat video surveillance like a time-stamped map. Investigators would typically collect casino surveillance feeds showing arrival, behavior, and departure, dock area footage showing who boarded vessels and when bodycam footage from multiple agencies, dashcam footage from responding vehicles, potential civilian phone videos recorded during chaos. Video is valuable because it does 2 things simultaneously. It rebuilds movement with fewer memory distortions. It prevents later narrative manipulation by preserving objective sequencing. In cases that become nationally visible, video also functions as protection for the investigation itself. Public controversy can erupt quickly, especially when an officer-involved shooting occurs and innocent civilians are temporarily detained. Video becomes evidence, but also accountability. Evidence logistics. How investigators stitch a case together: one crime spree, many crime scenes. A major complication here is that the crime spree did not produce one crime scene. It produced multiple nodes, each with its own evidence types and jurisdictional ownership. Key sites include the initial USPS theft location, Arizona. Witness testimony from postal worker GPS scanner tracking logs. Any footprints or physical traces near the van's last known location. The casino parking site, Nevada, pickup truck containing packages. Surveillance footage of suspects arriving and leaving. Evidence of package transfer or theft organization. Fingerprints, DNA potential, and item recovery documentation. The dock and water taxi zone, Nevada. Surveillance showing suspect movements. Identification of which taxi was taken. Local witness accounts, time markers for suspect departure downriver. The river route and landing zone, Arizona. Pursuit path tracking. Possible discarded items along shoreline vessel examination for prints, fibers, trace evidence. The apartment complex confrontation scene, Arizona. Shell casings, bullet trajectories, vehicle impacts, suspect weapon recovery and analysis officer bodycam and vehicle camera footage. Civilian safety and injury assessment records. The recovered postal van in the desert, Arizona. Abandonment location. Signs of tampering, tracker removal attempt, package removal, evidence that could link both suspects to the van. The investigator's job is to make these nodes feel like one continuous story. That requires chain of custody, precise time ordering, and cross-agency cooperation. Without coherence, defense attorneys can argue that evidence is disconnected or contaminated. In complex cases, the primary legal battle is often not the morality of what happened. It is the technical integrity of what can be proven. The weapon and warrants. Why background matters. After the shooting capability and desperation become part of motive analysis. Once Eric Watkins was identified, police records indicated a history of warrants and prior charges. These details do not prove guilt in the present event on their own, but they shape investigators' interpretation of behavior. In a criminal escalation analysis, investigators typically examine, why would a suspect run instead of surrender? Why would they take extreme risks like stealing a government vehicle in a water taxi? Why would they engage police with gunfire in a residential area? The answer is often cumulative pressure. A suspect with legal exposure may perceive capture as the end of everything. That perception can produce violent resistance, especially if the suspect believes there is no acceptable outcome. The weapon becomes the turning point. Once a firearm enters the event, the incident becomes structurally unpredictable. The suspect can control entire zones with fear alone, even without firing. And once shots are fired, the event becomes irreversible. From that moment forward, all agencies involved must treat the case as a lethal threat operation, not a property crime. The second suspect's escape window. How one person can vanish while everyone watches the main crisis. The most significant advantage for the second suspect came from one brutal reality. All attention was drawn toward the armed confrontation and fatal shooting. That does not mean law enforcement ignored the second suspect, but it does mean that resources, focus, and urgency were absorbed by the immediate life and death event. This is how real-world escapes happen, not through genius, but through distraction. During the peak moments of crisis, perimeter coverage becomes imperfect. Officers are retasked to medical, evidence, and scene control duties. Radio traffic becomes crowded. Civilian movement increases confusion. A second suspect can blend into normal life patterns. A second suspect does not need to do something extraordinary to vanish. He only needs to look ordinary at the exact time chaos peaks. The case becomes two investigations: finding the missing suspect versus proving the full chain. As this case progresses, it naturally splits into two goals. Goal 1, identify, locate, and apprehend the second suspect. This includes public alerts, interagency coordination, and evidence analysis aimed at finding a person. Goal 2, build a complete prosecutable narrative. Even if the second suspect is never found immediately, the prosecution must still establish what occurred. Theft of USPS van possession and movement of stolen items. The transfer to a truck with packages, the movement toward the casino and water taxi. The armed confrontation at the apartment complex evidence, proving the suspect's direct threat and actions. If the second suspect is found later, the case becomes stronger. If not, investigators still must ensure the remaining legal record is defensible and complete. This is where the public often misunderstands cases. People assume arrest lasts closure. In reality, closure requires a case structure that survives legal attack. Why this story grips audiences. It's not just crime, it's escalation under uncertainty. The reason cases like this attract intense attention is not only because of action or violence. It is because the sequence reveals how fragile normal life becomes when one chaotic decision triggers a chain reaction.